Greetings, I'm Christopher Hildt, and today we're doing another installment of Tales from the Hildt, and we're going to read a selection of Red Selineus from his two-book series, Incantations. The first section, called Seeds That Fester. Today would have been his 47th birthday, so if he were here to him, I would say happy birthday, bro, but since he's not, I'm going to put on my dome cover so we can avoid this glare. Hopefully get my hat on straight. Or not. This is Incantations 2, Ominous Horizons. But today we're going to start with Book One, Dark Tidings. And we're going to read Seeds That Fester. But in order to do that, I need to be able to see the words. So we'll put on my cheaters and we'll get to this. Now, he has a dedication here in the beginning. It says, I would like to dedicate this book to my family, who have always believed in me. Most importantly, to my mother, without whom I wouldn't be here. That's true for me as well. I owe a lot to Mama Hildt, as I like to call her. I don't know if anybody else does, but I do. So, there we are. Incantations Book One, Dark Tidings. Seeds That Fester. And I don't know if you can see that, but that's where it is. And just to get a really good look at this cover, the one thing that our first publisher did for us was they got us some decent covers. Okay, now this is I have read through some of this before, but I just either wasn't in the mood or I don't know. So I don't know. With that said, let's explore this together, shall we? What you're about to read is, in part, a tale that never was. This is what few know that really took place on the fringes of the greatest war to ever engulf Anvilbine. Certainly there have been larger battles before and since, and there have been many wars as well, true, yet never was so much at stake. Many are the repercussions still felt, and shall continue to be felt for generations. It all started with the simplest and perhaps purest thing, a parent's love for their child. Let us begin with Castle de Corneith. The castle was an immense structure, standing nearly 40 feet above land, and stretching for 2 miles in either direction. A creamy, green-hued moat surrounded it entirely. 8 towers held the outer walls of the barbican together. 2 small ones inset into the rear of the inner keep, and 6 larger ones, 2 in each side wall, and 1 at each corner, set into each. The north and south walls of the outer barbican were drawbridges that led to a large gate. Mounted all along the top of the castle walls were fortifications of defense, a battlement above each gate with several stairs leading to and from them, as well as every 10-yard interval in the walls. The entire length of the main road led into Tanglewood Forest, which surrounded the castle for many acres, and could be monitored from the vantage of the north battlement. Flanking either side of each drawbridge were 2 two-story chambers, also used as gatehouses, where an immense crank and pulley system was rigged to control them. The cranks consisted of 3 large gears working in tandem, each cog size smaller. 2 heavy iron chains were riveted into each drawbridge, and wound around the pulleys attached to counterweights, and thence the cogs. This made for faster lowering and rising with accurate precision, and affording more balance to the drawbridges. Each massive gate was made of bronze, intricately engraved with the de Corneith family crest. A portcullis accompanied them, each woven to resemble braided coils. Beyond the gates were small guard posts. Past the north post rested a small town comprised of 10 modest and small houses, an inn, a chapel, and a small town square. Further along the east wall, under an overhang of straw resting atop several wooden pillars, was inset the stables. Nearly dead center of the castle grounds loomed an uncharacteristic marble tower. The main courtyard crouched behind it and led to the inner keep, which was more similar to a small mansion or manor in appearance. However, unlike the grainy stone walls of the Barbican, battlement, and towers, it was fashioned from wood and copper, lending it a beautiful red hue in the morning sun, and a tranquil ashen brown in the twilight. As to the central tower, it was a smooth gray, forged from a finely chiseled slab of solid marble. Only a lone balcony, set at its zenith, marred its pristine liquid-like surface. In the courtyard strode a man of great importance to this tale. Although many others share in it, he is the focal point. Many lives entwined in an endless sea of history with many waves and ripples are found throughout this tale, but his had a querulous fit. Interesting word, querulous. I'm going to have to look that one up. The central tower was his home, his name, Thomas Zandel de Chester, though most in Castle de Conaeth knew him as Hugo de Gascar. Gascar. Hugo de Gascar. I like that name. Thomas was King Hayden's advisor and a mage. He was known to be very reclusive, yet the king favored him above all his other advisors, for it was well known that Thomas had been instrumental in ending the great wars that ravaged Cliquot for many generations just 4 years prior. Thomas was a young man, only in his 25th year. He had long, dark brown hair that he occasionally braided near the front of his ears to appear at formal ceremonies and other such courtly matters. He stood 6 feet and 2 inches, a great deal taller than the average of 5'8". Thomas moved silently but full of purpose through the courtyard. The young man had experienced more in his lifetime than men twice that age, but now, as the crisp night air clung to his body almost as a second skin, he did not worry about his past. His brown eyes scanned the courtyard. Everything appeared to be running along the usual course. The castle was in its normal routine. Servants busying themselves with the nightly chores and preparing for the storm on the horizon. And yet, something felt off. The wind began to pick up. Thomas made his way to the gatehouse and summoned the guard. The guardsman rushed to his side and stood at attention. "Sir," the guard stated matter-of-factly. "At ease, Davis." Thomas patted him on the shoulder. "Please summon Jack for me." The guard smiled and nodded, and was quickly about his task. Apparently Mark and Ernst were wrong about him, Thomas thought as he smiled wryly. Only in the king's service for 2 weeks and already promoted to gatehouse guard. Davis has a promising career ahead of him. "Ho, you go!" Jack greeted the mage as he and Davis approached. Davis quickly shuffled back to his post. "Ho, Jack!" Thomas clasped his hand in return. "What can I do for you this dreary eve?" Jack smiled warmly. "Just be a little extra alert," Thomas replied as he yawned. "Pardon me. Anyway, just be a little extra alert. Everything seems routine, but something ominous is in the air." "Aye, the storm," chuckled Jack. Lightning flashed and thunder roared as rain erupted in the sky and issued forth from overburdened clouds. The rain began cascading down, billowing in the chaotic wind that ravaged the night. "Nice touch," Thomas commented on Jack's timing. Jack erupted into laughter as the rain fell in a misty shroud, blotting and obscuring nearly all vision. Large droplets splattered on the ground, quickly forming various puddles, and muddying all earthbound roads leading to and from the castle. "Relax, my friend," Jack clapped Thomas's arm as he spoke, "and rest easy. It's only a storm." "You're right, of course," Thomas replied, but still felt uneasy, as his weariness began to overtake him. Jack smiled, noting his obvious fatigue, and said, "To bed with you, Hugo, before you collapse. I've heard that you've been awake for nearly 2 days. This uneasiness is just your body's way of telling you it's had enough. Would you like an escort?" Jack signaled Davis, but Thomas quickly waved him off. "No," Thomas yawned again. "You're right, Jack. I just need some rest. Thank you and good eve." "Captain Sergey is relieving me soon," Jack added. "I'll pass your concern on to him as well. Good eve." Thomas awoke and hobbled to his balcony. He did not remember getting to bed, nor did he particularly care. He wore no clothing at this interval, as he enjoyed sleeping unencumbered. Being at such a height, and the fact that it was past mid of night, he worried not of onlookers. The corner of Thomas's eye, which seemed dark brown in the misty, eerily gray-green, rainy night, captured movement near the stables. All was still when he trained his full gaze upon the area. He muttered a soundless curse under his breath, whispered a strange phrase, and his eyes shimmered with a pale blue light. He looked the area over once again. The stillness that greeted his vision caused him to chuckle at himself, as his eyes contrasted black against the dark night, saving the occasional flicker of burning white light that streaked through the sky. Then, for no particular reason, Thomas scanned towards the north gate. There he caught a slight glimpse of movement. Lightning illuminated the courtyard for a split second, nearly blinding him, but he blinked his eyelids shut in time to spare them. When he reopened his eyes, only shadows remained. He groaned as curiosity tugged at his mind. Thomas retreated into his demesne. Thomas retreated into his demesne. I like that word too. Check that one out. The balcony fed into a large room which was divided into three parts: a crude but effective laboratory, a study of sorts, and a bedroom, a desk and chair and bookcase for the study, a small table with various bottles and that's a word, alchemistic instruments for the laboratory, and a bed, a wardrobe, a small fireplace, and a nightstand for the bedroom, each furnished modestly. Interesting. This Hugo seems to be a wizard as well, casting a spell to make himself see in the dark. That was kind of cool. Let's continue, shall we? A two-handed sword adorned the wall directly above the bed. The fireplace stood between the table and desk, and a wooden door stood upon the wall opposite them. The sword was 70 inches in length. The blade itself encompassed 57 of those same inches. It was made from strange light blue steel, sharpened to a smooth, fine point, and the hilt was bejeweled with turquoise. The sword was of high quality. Thomas made straight for the desk, which had two drawers on each side in a column, with a small one inset in the middle under the tabletop. He opened the latter and produced a monocular, a simple leather tube with two circular lenses affixed to either end, the one smaller than the other. Thomas dashed back out onto the balcony and used the binocular to scan the area near the north gate. Seeing naught, he lowered the binocular with a disgruntled sigh. He was about to turn away when he again caught movement near the north gate. He quickly set the binocular to his eye and scanned the area. The gate was open, the portcullis up, and the drawbridge was lowered. Movement alerted Thomas's attention anew, and he maneuvered the binocular in time to snatch a split-second glimpse of someone retreating from the castle. This ought to be fun, seeing how he's butt naked. He scanned the main road in attempts at seeing whoever it was, but the Barbican torches were too dim to see aught. The rain began to paste onto the outstretched lens, blurring his vision. Damn, Thomas cursed under his breath, then retreated into his tower and scrambled to find his clothing. Thomas tossed the binocular onto his bed and made for his wardrobe. He threw it open and gave it a once-over. Various clothing, books, some small weapons, and many objects greeted his scrutiny. Hastily, Thomas yanked on his breeches, a simple shirt and vest. Then he slipped on his belt, his hooded mantle cloak, and boots. As he ran his right hand through the damp brown locks atop his head, he moved to the fireplace to warm up while he considered what he should do. He had the good sense to get something on. Shortly, Thomas moved back to the wardrobe. He pulled out 3 of 5 small silver rods, some clothes, and 16 sheathed miniature throwing knives. Quickly he adorned the throwing knives onto his body, 4 on his back, 4 on his chest, and 2 on each wrist and ankle. Then he produced a knapsack and placed the remaining items inside. He yanked up the knapsack and deposited it next to his cloak. Thomas ventured to the bookcase, grabbed a book, and thumbed through it. Finding the desired page, he read the passage he sought, snapped the book shut, and replaced it. Then he turned about and snatched his two-handed sword from the wall, baldric and sheath with it. He slung the blade on his back and then put it on his cloak, snatched up his knapsack, and headed out the door. The antechamber beyond housed only a spiral staircase, resembling a skeletal structure, wound all the way down to the base of the tower. No doors were discernible, and the staircase or walls. No doors were discernible from the staircase or walls, even where it seemed there should be. Thomas bounded down the stairs in a few moments' time, and emerged from his store. Lightning flashed, a glancing light across the tower's marble surface, and the wizard breathed in the night air. He glanced once more, questioningly to the stables, then, shaking his head to dismiss the misgivings, made his way through the village to the gatehouse, and immediately sought out the captain of the watch. Captain Sergei Zazine, That's an interesting word as well. I like unique names, and that's definitely unique. It's spelled Zasene. I'm guessing that's the seed. I like that. Thomas called the man. Okay, let's try that again. Captain Sergei Zasine, Thomas called the man as he approached. Sergei was blond-haired and blue-eyed, a foot or two shorter than Thomas, though he obviously had more muscle and was close to the same age as the mage. Sergei's hair was closely cropped to his head and squared near the forehead. His beard and mustache were neatly trimmed, though he was of a larger build than Thomas. Sergei's leather armor made him appear immense. The captain, who was in the middle of a desk full of paperwork, drifted his gaze up and locked eyes with Thomas, and a brief smile crossed his youthful yet weathered face. With a wave of his right hand, he dismissed the two guards stationed on either side of him. Once they had gone, he spoke in a stern, commanding tone. Hugo de Gascar, what brings you to my post at such a late hour? I was just wondering if there were any scouts scheduled to leave the castle within the past half hour, the mage replied. Of course not, Sergei chuckled lightly. All scouts coming or going have been accounted for the day, and none shall be entering or leaving for at least 2 weeks. 2 weeks, eh? Thomas pondered. I saw someone leaving the castle a few minutes ago, and thought I'd inquire as to why no guard inclined to notice. Sergei set his pen down and calmly said, Rest assured, none have come nor gone this night. Is there something else I can help you with? No, I suppose not, answered Thomas. Perhaps I should speak with your father. Xylo on the matter. Sergei's smile was replaced with a frown. My father does not need to be disturbed, he barked as he rose from his desk. What do you want me to do, Hugo? He snapped coldly, but quickly sobered before resuming. Would you have me send my men out to chase phantoms? You have been fooling about with one too many potions in your tower. It must have been glamour that you saw. Are you sure you wore... Okay. Are you sure you ward well enough, Captain? My ward of 2 years has not come into question until now. Why do you suppose that is? Sergei, I mean no offense, Thomas retreated. Too late. But I would feel reassured if you will allow me to venture out, Thomas offered, just to have a look for myself. Do what you will, the captain grunted. Only waste no more of my time. I thank you, Sergei, Thomas congratulated him. You have some wisdom after all. Sergei glared at Thomas and said, Go, before I have you locked up. Give my regards to your father, Thomas smiled. Certainly. Now be off, Sergei replied, returning his attention to his work. As the mage left the captain's office, the two guards returned to their post on either side of Sergei's desk. Thomas walked through the gate, undeterred, but observed. Why is the gate open and the drawbridge lowered this late at night? The mage wondered as he passed over the drawbridge. An old man with a long, unkempt gray beard and faded green robes remained hidden, watching, as the guards passed by the stables with a less than acceptable investigation. His pale brown eyes did not sparkle in the glint of the light of the torches held by some of the guards that passed by. Instead, they remained clouded with the same sadness that also etched his face. He scratched his head as he watched the guards move about, almost foolishly it seemed. He played with his mangled mop of hair for a moment, then whispered an incantation and disappeared. So apparently we're switching to a new character here. Nearly 2 miles from the gates of Castle de Corneille, Thomas noticed 3 armed men mounted on armored horses riding towards him. They all bore the standard of a winged serpent on their breastplates and shields, and their steeds strode with determination. He noted how brazenly they rode out in the open on the main road. The horsemen rode past him, as if he were insignificant. This angered him. Oh, I'm guessing this is the older mage. Okay. Am I not the king's archmage? Thomas thought while reaching for 2 of the throwing knives at his chest. And a large hand latched onto his shoulder. Thomas pulled away, seeing the hand join another, wrapping around the haft of an axe. Both hands melded into a mountain of a man. Thomas quickly went for his sword, and the man attacked. The axe blade dug into Thomas's left shoulder, as he attempted to dodge it. In shock, he released his sword, and it clattered noisily on the road. Grunting, Thomas tore free of the axe, allowing blood to flow from the newly formed gash. The man kicked him in the gut, forcing him backwards and flat on his back. Thomas cursed as he regained his footing and began chanting. Hearing the clangor, one of the horsemen yelled, "We are discovered!" The 3 horsemen veered their steeds around. Meanwhile, the behemoth of a man lunged at Thomas. But Thomas twisted to his left as the man dove past. Thomas faced the man and pointed at him as the man rose and turned. 5 bolts of white energy struck the man in the chest, and he fell face down in the mud. A little bit of battle going here. Let's keep the throat moist. Thomas pulled 4 throwing knives from his tunic and launched 2 from his hand. He clutched his left shoulder as new pain shot through it. Instinctively, he grasped a cradling hold on his shoulder. A very slight nausea instantly followed, and Thomas groaned. The knives unerringly slammed into their targets. Nonetheless, and 2 of the horsemen fell dead. However, the 3rd horseman continued to advance with 2 knives protruding from his shield. Thomas whispered an incantation and removed his hand from his shoulder. The wound glowed for an instant and began to seal itself. Thomas quickly retrieved his sword and set to receive the horseman's charge. Well, apparently he has the ability to heal, so mage, heal thyself. Thomas whispered an incantation. Okay, yeah, I read that one already. Thomas thrust his sword forward as the rider thundered past, crying out as the blade was wrested from his grasp, and the rider fell dead. Thomas moved to reclaim his weapon, but stopped short as 5 more riders hove into view. These new riders bore the same emblems as the horsemen before them. As they neared the mage, their leader ordered them to a stop. They surrounded Thomas, who was now panting with his efforts. Their leader dismounted his steed and strode over to Thomas as he surveyed his surroundings. Thomas noted that this knight adorned the rankings of captain under his gauntlets. Upon seeing his men lying dead on the ground, the knight grimaced. He turned to face Thomas. "What an embarrassment," the knight sighed. "The embarrassment is all yours," Thomas said coolly, but continued to breathe heavily. "You possess a tongue," remarked the knight, then backhanded Thomas and said, "Bite it, unless you are undressed." Thomas did not flinch, but retained his footing and laughed. This angered the knight, so he punched Thomas in the gut. The blow forced the mage to double over while gasping for breath. "Take him," ordered the knight. The riders dismounted and seized Thomas. The knight picked up Thomas's sword briefly, examined it, then tucked it into his saddlebags. As he remounted his horse, the knight said to Thomas, "I am Captain Bennett, and you are my prisoner." It didn't go well, did it? An hour passed without further event. Thomas cursed himself as his captors led him along. He was now mounted on a gelding, and his hands were bound to the pommel of the gelding's saddle bow. Okay. The gelding was tied to a steed in front of him. Thomas's shoulder healed considerably as they rode. Soon only a scar would prove the existence of the wound. "Pay attention, damn it!" Captain Bennett, who had actually been speaking for quite some time, barked as he moved alongside Thomas. Thomas had not realized that Bennett had been speaking, so he looked at the knight passively and smirked. Bennett smacked him across the face. "You will earn respect for your superiors," Bennett spat. The knight produced Thomas's sword from his saddlebag and held it aloft. "This is a curious blade," Bennett regarded it reverently. "But is not this metal an inferior element? Surely you do not use this for everyday use." "It's but an ornament," Thomas lied. "You speak with a strange dialect," Bennett noted. "Where are you from?" Thomas grunted, but otherwise did not respond. Bennett frowned. He glanced momentarily at the mage's shoulder. "I do not want to ask you why your wounds have healed so quickly." "Then don't," Thomas returned coldly. Bennett backhanded him across the face again. Thomas stared back defiantly and spit out some blood. Bennett raised his hand to strike once more, but lowered it after a moment's hesitancy. "I can see that conversing with you in civility is all but pointless." "Then you can see clearly," the mage responded. "Why do you waste time with such trivial banter?" I was just passing the time," Bennett admitted. "Yet no longer, for we have arrived." Many tents spread out before Thomas's scrying eyes, arranged in a fortified encampment. The tents were too many for him to count at the moment. He briefly noticed the central tent, which was large and appeared to be decorated with basic furnishings. The horsemen dismounted and untied Thomas. They placed him in chains and herded him to the central tent. A few moments passed. Then a tall young man with black hair and dark, foreboding eyes entered. "Greetings," said the young man, saluting him. Thomas nodded, but otherwise did not respond. The young man smiled and said, "Of course you do not return by formality, and I can certainly understand your hesitancy. However, it is unnecessary. Please, speak your mind freely. Thomas looked the young man over. He sported a trim beard and mustache and was thin. Thomas believed that the young man was a few years younger than him. Who are you? Thomas asked. I am William D. Emerity. Of course, proclaimed the young man. Who else would I be, bearing the standards of the house of D'Amerti? Hal D'Amerti, Thomas mused. I could be at that, William barked at a laugh, but I am not. What are you doing so close to Castle de Corneth, with such a large assembly of troops and scouts out in force? That seems a little treasonous, wouldn't you say? Do you intend to usurp King Hayden? You are very direct and to the matter, are you not? Well, Thomas demanded. Indeed, William stated firmly. I do intend to usurp the king, this very night, in fact. How stupid of you, Thomas admonished him. Castle de Cornet's defenses are too great, and King Hayden has far too many allies. William emitted a dark smile as he spoke. His allies are far too busy dealing with Lord Lagraves to the west, and have been for the past 2 years. I have taken great care in planning this siege. I wasn't talking about those fools to the west, Thomas lied. Who then? William inquired. Hayden's courageous son, William? I'm sure that Hayden will be paid to learn he lays dragon slaying. William gauged Thomas. Excuse me. William gauged Thomas's reaction, seeing no trace of any emotion on his countenance. William continued. No one will arrive in time, and the crown shall be mine. Thomas laughed and said, You desire too damn much. Yes, I do, William returned, and I have the power to take it. You're a damn fool, Thomas exclaimed. I know who you are, Hugo de Gascar. William smiled triumphantly. We met 4 years ago at the close of the Great Wars. Do you remember? Thomas strayed for a glimpse of the memory, but found none. Believing his answer to be forthcoming, William waited. Should I? The mage queried at length. Yes, William sneered. I'm sorry, but I don't, Thomas replied. Hayden had just united all of Clicquot. William explained. It was the first time in centuries that Clicquot had been united under one king. Hayden, Lords Falden, and Ugero, Lord Lagraves, and my father signed a treaty. I was there, and so were you. It was on that day that Hayden and my father settled on mine and Deborah's betrothal. The princess is betrothed to you? Thomas scoffed. That's rich. Tell me then, Hugo, William said, dismissing the mage's jeer. Is Deborah still the snobbish little bitch that I remember? I only met her that one time, and I'm sure she doesn't remember me. Has she matured? Thomas feigned lack of interest, though William's candor deeply repulsed him. How would I know? Thomas asked. I'm not a handmaiden. You are the king's archmage and closest adviser, William responded. And this concerns me how? Thomas stated flatly. I see, William returned. At any rate, fortune still smiles upon me. How so? Thomas queried. By the fact that you have fallen into my hands so soon. Thomas raised an eyebrow and cried. Is this all just a game to you? Life is a game, William smiled, and I intend to live it to the utmost. I don't like you, Thomas concluded. Hastily, a knight entered the tent. The knight stood at attention and saluted William. My lord, the knight implored. William turned to him and demanded, Why do you disturb us? A beast is attacking the camp, stammered the knight. Nearby, a hideous growl accented the knight's report. We shall have to continue this later, de Gascar, William informed the mage. Soldier, he ordered a nearby guard. The guard snapped to attention and belted, Sir! Guard de Gascar well. Yes, my lord, the guard saluted William. William and the knight made tracks to the disturbance. The guard turned to face Thomas, and the mage smiled. You just stay where you are, ordered the guard, and we will have no problems. Thomas held up his chained hands and shook them. Of course there will be no problems, laughed the mage. I've got to think of something quick. Outside the tent, the sound of clashing weapons grew closer. Thomas looked at his chained hands, and then the guard, and then his chained hands again. Do you want to see a neat trick? Thomas asked the guard. No, the guard snapped, as he tried to pay as much attention to what was happening inside the tent as what was happening without. Just keep still. Oh, that's too bad, Thomas pouted. I was going to show you how to do it. You'll be able to win quite a few bets with it. The soldier shuffled uneasily and appraised the mage. Thomas smiled as innocently as he knew how. Somehow this won the guard over. Well, all right, snapped the guard. Be quick about it. Outside the tent, a horrid cry sounded. It must have been the beast. Thomas began muttering, and they heard a yelp. "Hurry up," the guard insisted. "Of course," Thomas replied, and held up his hands. "Look!" Thomas's chains melted away into nothingness, and the guard's jaw dropped. Quickly, Thomas slugged him in the face. The guard fell back and smashed his head onto a small table. Thomas briefly examined him to make sure he was unconscious. Satisfied that he was, Thomas opened his vest. Everything but his rods had been confiscated. He searched the guard and took the dagger he found. He heard the drudge of footsteps approaching and quickly slipped out the back of the tent. By the time he heard William's bellowed rage, he had become part of the forest. By the gods, that was close, he thought, as he got as far away from William's encampment as possible. Unfortunately, he did not notice the 3 men that followed. Thomas entered a small clearing and discovered a small encampment with 2 people he would never have guessed would be there. "Princess Deborah, Stuart Martin," Thomas cried. "What the never are you doing here?" The 2 stared from their slumber, realizing they were in a compromising position. The 2 quickly disentangled. "You go to Gascar," stammered Martin as he leapt from his bedroll and moved defensively in front of Deborah. "Where did you come from?" "From the castle," the mage reported, "which is where you 2 belong. I've just escaped from Duke de Emeretti's men." Deborah's hands flew to her mouth as she gasped. "William!" "The same," Thomas replied. "Hurry, we must alert the castle." "It is too late for that," Captain Bennett said as he approached with 2 knights. "Damn it," Thomas cursed, drawing his new dagger. "Do I have to kill you to get away from you?" "If you think you can," Bennett challenged. "What is the meaning of this?" Martin demanded. "Silence, dog," Bennett snapped, momentarily glaring at him, before returning his gaze to Thomas. "You go to Gascar, I presume. You are so easy to track at night. It's almost pathetic. Even that illusion you cast yourself a score ago did not fool me." Thomas canted his head forward and said, "Well, it was worth a try." You know, look back here. That was an interesting transition. That's how it went. Bennett laughed and continued. "Very soon, my lord will have you back in his keeping. He will be so pleased that he may allow me to keep this delectable girl." Bennett gestured to Deborah, licking his chops very solicitously and cupping his crotch. She turned her face away with disgust. "I think not, cur," Martin challenged him. Bennett laughed and said, "Secure them." "Captain Bennett," Thomas yelled and pointed his dagger at him, "I believe I challenged you." "Hold," Bennett ordered his men, and his knights obeyed. "You wish to duel?" "Oh no," Deborah cried. "Mage, I forbid you to duel." "Would you rather I let him ravish you?" Thomas demanded of her. "I doubt he'll wait till we return to William's camp." She looked at Bennett, and he had insinuated a kiss with his lips. He added smooching noises for emphasis. "Absolutely not," Deborah cried in revulsion. "Then there's no other choice," the mage concluded. "Stand back." "You as well," Bennett ordered his knights. They stepped back 3 paces, simultaneously with Deborah and Martin. Thomas and Bennett commenced pacing around one another in a circle. "If I am the victor, we go free," demanded Thomas. Bennett drew his dagger and canted his head affirmatively. Thomas flipped his dagger around his hand. "Mage, be careful," breathed Deborah. "You call it," Bennett, Thomas offered. "To the death," the knight smiled. Bennett took a testing swipe at Thomas. Thomas blocked and countered. Bennett parried and swiped. Thomas deflected. "You're skilled," Bennett appraised him. "Sort of," returned Thomas. Bennett thrust forward. Thomas blocked and turned his dagger upside down. Bennett lunged again, but Thomas deflected the attack and stabbed at Bennett's shoulder. The mage barely missed. Thomas flipped his dagger up. With a yell, the 2 combatants locked blades. Deborah and Martin watched the duel intently, seizing the opportunity. The 2 knights slowly moved toward them. "No!" Deborah cried as one of the knights seized her by the arm and put a dagger to her throat. Thomas quickly turned to her cry. This momentary distraction allowed Bennett to knee him in the gut. Bennett moved quickly in for the kill while the other knight knocked Martin on his ass. "Don't move," the knight commanded Martin through clenched teeth. Martin tried to get up, but his assailant drew his sword and put it to his neck. The knight sneered at him, seeing the futility of the situation. Martin relaxed. Martin relaxed. Thomas smacked Bennett's hand, knocking aside his weapon. Then he thrust his dagger up into Bennett's face. The blade bit into the knight's skull and lodged straight between the eyes, and a strange look crossed Bennett's countenance as he fell to his knees. Rising to his feet, Thomas looked him in the eye. A morbid smile spread across Bennett's lips. Thomas looked at him blankly. Bennett went limp and cascaded to the earth. "Surrender or the girl dies," ordered the knight holding Deborah. Your master has vital plans for her, laughed Thomas. As for the other one, go ahead and kill him. It matters little to me. Martin blinched as his captor pushed his sword closer to his neck. You're lying, the knight insisted, pressing the dagger close to Deborah's throat. Deborah emitted a frightened gasp. The knight motioned for his comrade to ease off Martin. Then kill them both, lapdog, the mage dared him. The knight hesitated, and Thomas smirked confidently. The knight shoved Deborah down into the mud and kicked her aside. His comrade kicked Martin in the head, rendering him unconscious. Then they converged on the mage together. Deborah cried out in terror as Thomas crossed his wrist. Two hidden knives popped into his hands, and he launched them at his enemies. The knives struck the knights in their larynxes, and they crumpled to the ground. Fucking cowards, Thomas spat angrily, releasing his pent-up adrenaline. Using a girl to fight. Thomas helped Deborah to her feet. Deborah coughed and sputtered. Are you well, my lady? He implored. You killed them, she stammered. Thomas raised an eyebrow and said, Yes, and the scum deserved it. Hurry, we must leave this place. You can tell me what you're doing out here later. Martin stood up and groaned as he wiped the mud from his face. Thomas and Deborah registered his disheartenment. I'm all right, thank you, Martin said to no one in particular. Right, responded Thomas. Let's go. But I have money, Deborah protested. Thomas chuckled, and his misplaced mirth stunned her. Martin shook his head dismissively. Quickly, Thomas came to his senses and apologized. Then he looked Deborah over and burst into laughter again. But I have money, he mimicked her. She looked at him as if he was insane and demanded, How dare you mock me? Thomas sobered once more and said, My sincerest apologies, my lady. I'm sure the rain will wash it all away. Martin was still shaking his head. Thomas looked to him, then again to Deborah. Then he motioned them towards the castle. My lady, let us walk, Thomas said as he did this, and as the three got under way, he demanded, What were you two doing out here so late? Were you having a secret tryst? Absolutely not, Martin insisted. If you must know, mage, Deborah chided him, Martin was escorting me across to the sea to Bendoon. We were tired and cold, so we made camp, and Martin was kind enough to share the warmth of his body with me so I wouldn't catch my death of cold. Right, Thomas spoke as if he didn't care. Why were you going to Bendoon? To seek sanctuary in the court of King Caesar, Deborah promptly replied. Ah, Thomas admitted, with understanding, to stay with your cousin Sophia. Deborah nodded in confirmation. I do not think it is any of your concern at all, mage, Martin flicked Thomas across the forehead with his finger. If you wish to lose that finger, by all means touch me again, Thomas intoned. The mage stared Martin down and returned his affront. Then the mage returned to Deborah. Why did you feel the need to leave in secrecy? Thomas demanded. And without the royal escort, do you, my lady? My father would never permit it, Deborah answered. I believe you do not know your father as well as you think you do, Thomas informed her. Why would you want to leave the sanctuary of Castle de Corneath anyway? You do not have to answer him, my lady, Martin interjected. This matter does not pertain to him. Silence, Deborah commanded him. What right do either of you think you have to speak to me in such fashion? My apologies, my lady, Martin quickly submitted himself to her feet. Deborah looked at Thomas. The maid shrugged. Well, Deborah demanded, I have merely asked you questions, Thomas responded. Well, Deborah demanded. I have merely asked you questions, Thomas responded. I do not care for the tone you use, she chastised him, and my business is none of your concern. Yet I shall answer your question. I mean to escape my arranged marriage to William de Ameretti. My 16th birthday is mere 6 weeks away, and I refuse to be saddled with him. Royals have arranged marriages all the time, Thomas returned. Aside from his current activities, why does this arrangement distress you, lady? It is said that William is a very cruel man, Martin interceded. She fears he will mistreat her. I shall answer for myself, Deborah scolded Martin. Of course, my lady, Martin recovered. I mean no disrespect. But he seemed like such a nice guy, Thomas mused sardonically, and turned to Martin. And this concerns you how? Me? Asked the steward. I only wish to see my lady safely to Bendoon, unmolested. Thomas raised an eyebrow and frowned. He glared at Martin, and the steward glared back. I will let that remark depart as a slight annoyance, barely perceived, the mage informed him. I have no idea what you mean, Martin feigned in innocent expression. Thomas shook his head and sighed. Right. Deborah, Martin called to her. Thomas looked at him and raised an eyebrow. Martin blushed. Then Martin quickly stammered, Princess, what should we do? We must alert the castle, but we cannot return without consequences. At this time, there's no alternative, Thomas informed them. I would say your wedding is off, my lady, given the circumstances. There are soon to be changes. Mage, Deborah managed a quick, firm query. At your service, my lady, Thomas replied. She looked into his brown-hued eyes. So sad, she thought. What secret burden could they hold? Thomas raised an eyebrow at her appraisal, feeling awkward and somewhat uncomfortable under her scrutiny. Seeing this exchange, Martin quickly asked, So, are we returning to the castle, my lady? Deborah took a deep breath as she moved away from them and answered, Of course, but first I must rest. Thomas noted that as she stepped past Martin, the steward inhaled sharply and turned slightly from her presence. She was oblivious to his reaction as she continued over to a nearby tree. She leaned up against the tree uneasily and sighed. Judging her to be just outside of earshot, Thomas turned his piercing gaze to the steward. What's wrong, Martin? Nothing, Hugo, Martin stammered and retreated a few paces. Then why did you waver as she passed you? The mage pressed, realizing that his presence intimidated the steward. She is the princess, Martin rationalized. You lie well enough to make yourself believe otherwise, Thomas admonished him. I cannot tell if that is a slander or a perception, the steward remarked. It's both, Thomas confessed with a smirk. You know what I'm talking about. You floundered like a lost ship in a storm at sea. I know that look. Tell me. Martin quickly turned his eyes aside and said, I cannot say. I can draw the truth from you, Thomas intoned as he raised his hands. It will be painful, though. Martin looked at Thomas and then at his hands. The mage wriggled his fingers as though they were the legs of a large spider. All right, Martin surrendered, but you must promise never to tell another living soul. So it's okay to tell dead souls, then, Thomas jeered. You are a right bastard, Martin retorted. I never claimed otherwise, was Thomas's reply. Lost in her thoughts, Deborah heard Martin's outburst. Well, let's take a little slight break here. This is Luna. She's our little kitty, and she's decided to join us for this reading, I see. You're going to have to let me work there, Luna. So I'll start that paragraph over. Okay. Lost in her thoughts, Deborah heard Martin's outburst and decided that the mage was instigating him again. She decided to listen for a moment to determine what was truly transpiring. Before she would rejoin the two men, Martin stammered, I am in love with her. Deborah's heart skipped a beat, and her ears perked up. Did he just say what I thought he said, she wondered? You can't help who you believe you love, Thomas consoled him. The mage now confirmed it. Deborah started. Martin nodded and said, What does it matter? I'm just a steward. I can love her all I want, but nothing will come of it. I'm resigned to that. All I ask is that you help me take care of her. What am I to do? Deborah fretted. Martin has been a friend of mine since childhood, yet I cannot picture him in love with me. Thomas nodded affirmatively and assured Martin she will be safe. I cannot think about this now, she determined, as she returned to the two men. Thank you, Hugo, she heard Martin saying. The two fell silent as Deborah rejoined them. I am ready to continue, Deborah announced as she looked at Martin with seemingly new eyes. She was sure that she knew his secret, yet neither his actions nor his words betrayed him of such. Perhaps Martin and the mage spoke of another, she told herself. Whilst it is yet safe to do so, my lady, Thomas counseled her, I will return you both to the castle. No, Deborah responded calmly. We will continue to Bendoon as I have planned. You are welcome to follow us once you have alerted the castle to William's intentions. This is a bad idea, my lady, Thomas beseeched her. I must ask you to reconsider. I will not. Deborah swooned. Martin immediately followed suit. What the never? Thomas exclaimed before collapsing as well. The rain subsided. The thunder and lightning grew distant, and the storm railed out. The night became tranquil once more. Martin awakened, alone in a tent. He rubbed his eyes and struggled to his feet. A table rested in the center of the tent. Upon it laid readied refreshments. Martin poured himself a cup of mead and drank from it deeply, easing his thirst. The tent flap hung open, and a robed figure entered. Martin rushed before the robed one and quickly prostrated himself. Master, Martin addressed the robed one submissively. The robed one hissed as he pulled Martin up by the scruff of his collar. What have I done wrong? Martin whined. You almost lost the princess, you idiot. The princesses, you idiot. Please, Martin protested. But the robed one threw him across the room. Martin crashed into the table, breaking his arm and sending the fanfare to scatter around the ground. He yelped as he crawled into a corner and whimpered, as the broken shards of bone in his arm grinded together. This sent a ripple of nausea through his entire body. The robed one came menacingly towards him. Martin raised his unbroken arm defensively. "Why would you help the little bitch?" the robed one demanded, as he waved his arm in an arc, preparing to strike. Martin mumbled and sobbed, I love her, master, please." The robed man stopped and glared at Martin with disgust and hissed, "You fucking worm. You would risk my lord's plans for the love of a girl?" "Yes," Martin whined in response. The robed one stood in silent contemplation for a few moments, breathing heavily with scorn. Martin lowered his head into the comfort of his unbroken arm. Full of guilt and shame, the robed one looked at the pitiful wretch before him. "I no longer require thy services," the robed one hissed. Martin tentatively raised his head and looked at the robed one in bewilderment. "Then I am free?" he inquired weakly. "Yes," the robed one answered simply, and yanked Martin to his feet. "Thou art free to die." The robed one punched Martin's broken arm. Martin gasped for air as his arm wrenched with great pain, and more nausea raced through him. He heard the robed one chanting, but did not understand what he was saying. With one last great surge of his lungs, he cried out. His chortle pierced the fragile sky. The robed one pointed at Martin, and his insides imploded. With his own blood, Martin's dilapidated lungs no longer working, heaved. He spluttered and gasped, blood running from his mouth like a small spring. "Deborah," Martin moaned just before drawing his last breath, "I do love you." But he never finished his final statement. Deborah awoke with a start. She was propped against a barrel in a tent. Thomas sat quietly next to her. His wrists seemed inflamed, and she realized they were in shackles. She quickly glanced at Thomas and saw that he was chained as well. Both of them were chained to a long iron post. The post was lodged firmly into the ground in front of them. "What happened, maid?" she demanded. "Where are we?" "In the camp of William de Amoretti," Thomas answered, nonplussed. "Was that noise just now a dying animal?" "I hate to be the bearer of any more bad news," Thomas replied without question, "but it was Martin." "Martin?" she stammered. "Then he is dead?" "I'm sorry," Thomas tried to console her. "It turns out that he was in William's service." "Why would he serve William?" Deborah demanded. "Who knows?" Thomas sighed. "I guess that by escorting you to Bandun he was disobeying his orders. The important thing is that he is free. Yes, at a very high price, but also to preserve something far more important to him." "What, Thomas? What?" "You," Thomas answered slowly. "Then he did love me?" Deborah breathed. "I would honor his memory for who he was, not what he had become. I didn't know him well, but I'm sure his love for you was of serious and sincere intent. He gave his life to prove it." "I don't know what to say," Deborah coughed. "Or to think." "Get some rest," Thomas suggested. "The real nightmare will begin soon enough." "You must be tired as well," Deborah sighed. "Yes," he answered. "I wasn't able to complete my trance." "Your trance?" she asked suspiciously. "What's that?" "Never mind," Thomas responded. She gave him a sour look as he stood up abruptly. After a short time, Deborah clutched her arms to her shoulders. Thomas realized how cold it had become, and they were still wet and unclean. The frigid wind bit into the pair, warning of decline to come. Thomas stood next to her and wrapped her in his arms. She pushed him away at first, but then snuggled closer when she realized his intentions were only to keep her warm. Slowly, Thomas fell into a deep thought and vividly remembered. In a large forested area, 5 tents formed a circle around 4 men, seated in a small campfire. Thomas was inside his tent at this time. He was trancing, a practice he had learned from a fellow named Frigandri. Trancing was the term he used to call it, because he had trouble pronouncing the Falaran name for it. Trancing was a meditative state where the body and mind became intertwined on a physical, spiritual, and etheric level, where the mind, body, and spirit would become fully rested in a very short period of time, and yet retain the full faculty of the senses of sound, touch, taste, and smell. It allowed the practitioner more time to complete various tasks. This is kind of fun to read with her on my chest. Let's take a quick look here. It's a very large. That's why his books aren't written by chapter. They're kind of like short stories. And I'm looking at this, and I've got quite a few pages left. Here we go. In this way, Thomas could possibly continue for a year longer for Falarns before needing to recover with full natural sleep. The longer one used this ability, the longer their recovery time would be. In the year and a half Fagandri had fostered him, Thomas learned his skill among many others, mastering and learning of all the dangers associated with it. However, there was a debate going on amongst his friends, a debate that continued to interrupt his trance. Viper was a knight Thomas had met when he lived at his mentor Alfred's tower. He normally dressed in common fashion, a simple shirt, breeches, and boots. Yet he wielded a blade of fine quality and owned and maintained an expensive Clydesdale. Viper was almost in excellent physical health and was always well groomed. Viper was always in excellent physical health and was always well groomed. He kept his golden hair close cropped, clean, and brushed. It was very puzzling to Thomas that he lived his life so simply when he seemed to be of noble birth. Viper's charismatic tone was the voice that continued to trouble Thomas's trance. Thus far, announced Viper to his four companions, seated around the campfire, we left Foray and journeyed to Aquadon. There we go. We chartered a swift merchant ship and sailed to Portmire. Now we are en route to Valukilk, or Valuselk. We'll go with Valukilk. To hunt for the ancient transcribings of Alvar Condolisti, which is reputed to have been written by the ancient peoples who inhabited this continent known as Kleku. The trip has only taken us a short 3 months, and has been a pleasant one. Nevertheless, this current silence amongst us is truly disheartening. We are all friends here. Surely we have more to say to each other than the few words we've barely exchanged in the past deuce week. Viper had unfurled a map and traced a finger along as he spoke, so they all could see their route. You are correct, spoke Gian at last. Gian was acting as an advisor to Thomas. Though this middle-aged man rarely threw it about, he possessed great charisma, a born leader. Gian was a retired soldier. He had served under High King Francisco of Bandun, the current High King of Caesar's father. Cassidy admitted Cassidy was tall and sculptured, had green eyes and black hair. He had always dressed like a wealthy merchant, and was especially fond of silk. He kept a serious mind in everything he did or said. So mouthy, doesn't want to talk all of a sudden. Greg taunted him. Greg was tall and lanky. Thomas did not remember much more about him, except that he didn't really like him. Greg was a wanderer they had met on the way. You have a poor attitude towards Cassidy, Greg, said Tobias in disgust. Tobias was a short man, and had unkempt brown hair and striking blue eyes. His stature belied his thirsty growth. He appeared to be more of a boy rather than a man, almost mousy. Tobias wore garb that complimented Cassidy's, who always made sure he was dressed well. The two were openly lovers. Thomas never fully understood their relationship, but believed that everyone should live as they chose, provided they hindered no one else. Now, boys, Gian tried to diffuse any further argument. I need a little bit of drink. Luna decided to pop down here. Why would that bother me? Greg instigated further. Oh, sorry. Thomas remembered hearing the commotion. Escalalion started to awaken from his trance. Why would that bother me? Greg instigated further. I'm not sleeping with him. Well, I am, Tobias happily shot back, and I don't want to hear anything bad about my Cass. It's annoying and tacky. Whatever, dung lover, Greg laughed and slapped Tobias roughly on the back. How dare you, Cassidy cried, and slugged Greg in the jaw so hard he fell down. Gian reared back in confusion. Greg tripped Cassidy, then tried to get up, but Tobias pushed him back down. Enough, Viper beseeched his unheeding comrades. What are you doing? You little bastard, Greg stated. He is no such thing, Cassidy insisted, leaping onto the spry man. Sid, Toby, Greg, stop this at once, Gian intervened, as he came to his senses and pulled Cassidy off Greg. Viper pulled Toby back. Thomas remembered feeling disorientated as the sounds of the fighting continued, and he rose from his kneeling position in the tent. Must be 5 a.m. Okay. Greg took to his feet, shouting, Cassidy, you're sort of a sow. I'll show you a sow, Cassidy returned vehemently. Greg, that was uncalled for, Gian chastised him. Cassidy, simmer down. Why did you hit Greg? What the never's going on out here, Thomas ejaculated, as he emerged from his tent, sword in hand. Interesting term. Way to coin that phrase. Thomas remembered that everyone fell silent and gazed at him in awe. Then he realized that they were actually staring at his sword. They had never seen it unsheathed up to that time, not even in combat. A small argument between these three, Gian explained as he gestured to Greg, Cassidy, and Tobias. That got way out of hand, Thomas quickly concluded. He eyed the three combatants accusingly, apologized to each other. I am sorry, Greg, offered Cassidy. Yeah, me too, joined Tobias. I guess I'm sorry as well, Greg replied. Sid, Toby, well done, chimed the mage as he returned into his tent. Don't make me regret letting you come along, young fools. Good eve, Hugo, Gian called after him. You'd think he was Alfred or something, Tobias stated in disbelief. The statement had always struck Thomas as odd, but he never questioned Tobias about it. The group decided it was time for sleep and cast lots to see who would take which watch, excepting only Gian. Each one would take an hour watch, then Thomas would take the final watches of the night. As everyone took their sleep, as was his wont, Thomas also set up a few warning spells. This seems like we jumped into a flashback here. Viper's turn at watch came soon that evening. Near mid of night, the wind stopped blowing, and everything grew still. Crickets and birds stopped chirruping and chattering. The intensity of the air was sinister. Thomas believed that something was wrong. A voice inside his head warned of danger, and an overpowering sense of dread came upon him. Viper felt the foreboding as well, and he immediately rose. He unsheathed his longsword and scanned the area, but nothing caught his sight. The campfire died out, and a chill pall flowed over the camp. Looking from one to another, Viper's crying stopped at the mage's. There, a soft light flickered through the flap. Okay, let's see how much we got left here. There we go. Thomas began coming back to reality. Viper quickly stole across the campsite and peered into the tent. He spotted the light source immediately. It was a small unlit lantern. Over where a cot should be laid a strange suit of armor. Thomas was in the center of the tent, kneeling in a trance-like state. Embedded in the ground before him was his two-handed sword. Thomas looked very peaceful, almost angelic. Hugo, Viper put his hand on the mage's shoulder and looked back through the tent's flaps. Something's amiss. Thomas's eyes flickered open, revealing only the whites. I feel them coming, Thomas intoned. Viper started as he turned back upon seeing Thomas's eyes, cried, Gah! Thomas's eyes rolled back into place. The mage stood and pulled his sword from the ground. Viper recollected himself. Awaken the others, Thomas said simply. Then he urgently added, quickly. Viper was fast to Greg's tent. Get your butt out of my face, little girl. Kittens can be so fun. Let's see where I was. Okay. Awaken the others. Quickly. Viper was fast to Greg's tent. Wake up, something is upon us, he cried, but there was no response. Viper shook Greg hard. Awaken, he implored. There was no response. Viper tried to awaken his other comrades. His success rate was the same with each of them, filled with both worry and dread at the unknown at the same time. He returned to Thomas's tent. Hugo, no one wakes, he called out. Viper's words were greeted with silence as he discovered that the mage was absent. Viper returned to the middle of the encampment. He looked left and right for his comrade, but found no trace. He was ready to give up when he heard Thomas's voice in his mind. It was his own thoughts, but with Thomas's voice. "I am here, my friend," it spoke. "Listen carefully and move until I say, and don't move until I say. Look straight ahead. Do you see there in the shadows?" Viper looked straight ahead. There stood a tall Valarin with sharp features, black hair, red eyes, and long, bony fingers with pointed fingernails. It looked very frail, almost brittle. It wore only a light black loincloth. What the never is that? Viper wondered. A twisted one was the reply. "It is one of the many types of undead that plague this world. They generally travel in packs." "Where? I don't see any others," Viper thought as he snatched a quick glance around. "They're all around us," Thomas replied. "They're invisible." Viper froze as he realized the twisted one before him had moved closer. It smiled. The smile seemed to paralyze Viper in an icy cold embrace. Then the creature disappeared. "Move!" Thomas shouted. Viper clove forward with his longsword. Dark liquid splattered in his face and blinded him. Screams pierced his ears. Viper cried out as he held his sword straight out and spun around in a wide circle. Cold and deplorable liquid splashed on him from all sides, and appearing bodies began to build up around him. Death yawls sounded all around him. Thomas appeared nearby, chanting. Viper felt more of the stench-filled liquid splash on and around him as he continued to spin. More bodies appeared at his feet. Viper became nauseated. Suddenly, images of his enemies flashed through his head. He could see them surrounding him and being cut down by his blade before they appeared. He knew he could not hold like this forever, even though he could now see his enemies. Thomas ducked into Greg's tent. I'm going to see if I can get Luna to go this away. Yep, she did. Okay, where was I? I'm sorry. Okay. Thomas ducked into Greg's tent. A raucous scream emitted from within. A moment later, Thomas returned. Then he ducked into Gion's tent. Another scream ripped out. In the nearby distance, a great booming war horn sounded, and the few remaining twisted ones stopped to listen. Viper froze. The horn sounded again, closer this time. In a panic, the twisted ones scattered and fled. Thomas emerged from Gion's tent. Viper sheathed his sword and began to wipe the filthy blood from his face with his hands. "How did you know what those things were, Hugo?" he gasped. "I've learned of many things," responded the mage. "Their bodies must be burned. Excuse me." Thomas quickly entered Cassidy and Tobias's tent. Viper set about heaping all the twisted ones' corpses on the campfire and relit it. Time passed, and finally Thomas emerged from his comrade's tent. Grief etched his face. Another shout came from the war horn, ever closer and fast approaching. The flames of the fire began to raise the twisted ones' corpses. Greg and Gian stormed out of their tents with weapons in hand. Gian quickly loomed around the camp. He saw the look on Thomas's face, and tears filled his eyes. Gian ran to Cassidy and Tobias's tent. He looked at Thomas, but the mage could not hold his gaze. "No," breathed Gian. Thomas walked away as Gian entered the tent. Tobias as well pierced his comrades' souls with its lamentation. The horn blasted again, drowning out Tobias's keening, and an armed and armored host emerged from the forest. The host rode directly towards their camp, the symbol of a bear wandering through a forest emblazoned their shields and armor. Their lead rider held his hand up in greeting as the host came to a halt a few yards away from them. Tomas returned the pleasantry. The rider dismounted and began striding boldly towards him. A few of his men voiced their concerns, but he merely held up his hand to silence their protestations. And continued forward. The man regarded the bodies of the undead that Viper was continuously disposing of and grimaced. "May Kor protect us," the man muttered. They looked at Tomas and nodded in greeting. Looked at Thomas. Thomas returned the gesture. "Stranger, who do you serve?" the man asked Thomas as he neared him. "What do you mean?" Thomas queried. "These are troubled times," the man responded. "All of Kluklu is in the midst of a centuries-long war. Which side are you on? I would have to say none, Thomas answered. My name is Hugo de Gascar. Who might you be? I am King Hayden de Cordaith, the man announced himself with a salute. I am one of the contenders for the king's throne. You wish to usurp him? Thomas queried. I never thought about it like that, but I guess we are all usurpers here in Clacoo. Thomas motioned Hayden to sit by the campfire, and though the foul stench that wafted from it was outrageously sickening, Hayden accepted. Gian and Tobias joined the two standing near the campfire. Explain, entreated Thomas. The king of Clacoo died 1 century past, Hayden answered. He named no heir. Each of the noble lords staked their claim. Inner strife has riddled this land since that time. How do you feel about the situation? Thomas inquired. I say I don't know what happened, Hayden returned, and I'm sure I don't care. All I know is that this land has declined in this chaos too long. Being a descendant of the king's blood, the title is my birthright. Your birthright? Thomas interrupted him. That's quite a claim. How are you descended from his blood? I am the great-grandson of the king's cousin, Hayden answered, though I believe that no man is worthy of such investment. I am one of the lords that care for the people of this land. I want to be the king they deserve. Perhaps I can aid you, offered Thomas. What of your friends? Hayden asked. They are all freemen, Thomas answered. That is their decision to make. I follow you, Hugo, Viper announced. I am too old to fight another war, said Gian. I will return to Foray and inform Alfred of your decision. Don't forget your original quest, my friends. Both Thomas and Viper nodded. And don't forget to watch your hands, Hugo, warned Gian. They can build or destroy. Thomas nodded. I'll follow you, said Greg. I've got nowhere else to be. Do any of the lords align with those creatures? Tobias pointed to the smoldering forms of the twisted ones as he spoke. Aye, Hayden replied grimly. My staunchest adversary, Lord Gregor LeGraves. Then I will aid thee, Tobias gritted his teeth with determination. Come then, my newfound friends, cheered Hayden. This meeting has been fortuitous. Let us have a meal back at my encampment, share one another's tale. That we would gladly do, joined Thomas. Your friend there who cannot stay will join us as well, added Hayden. The least I can do is to share my hospitality. When he leaves on the morrow, I will send a small escort with him to wherever he chooses to go. And where are we bound? Thomas inquired. We journey to Arncross, Hayden said with a smile, in hopes to gain another ally. With the aid of Thomas and his companions, the war soon ended. Thomas quickly became good friends with Hayden, as well as his closest advisor. Sadly, Greg was lost on the final battlefield. Tobias was commended for his deeds and promoted to a general in Hayden's army. Thomas decided to accept Hayden's invitation to stay. Viper would return home. Before Viper departed, Thomas gave him his strange suit of armor. One day, Thomas promised him, I will tell you the story of this armor. Until then, please keep it in your care, my friend. And so his memory went. What is going to happen, Hugo? Deborah's voice pierced his thoughts. I thought you were sleeping, the mage laughed. I was, she answered. I'm awake now. What is William planning? He will lay siege to the castle in attempts to usurp your father, Thomas replied. Oh no, she cried. Don't worry, he tried to reassure her. Cor only knows why. But nothing can be done to stop it, so worrying is useless. You are a strange man, Deborah yawned. She laid her hand upon his shoulder and doubted she would ever manage to get back to sleep. In a few moments, however, Thomas heard the soft sounds of her rhythmic breathing. She was fast asleep. He smiled and slowly slipped into a trance-like state. I need some more liquid here. You can speak, William mused. The jackal-like creature shifted about nervously in its chains and growled at him. Wonderful, William continued undeterred. Now, can we get somewhere? The creature found itself in a tent, designed to store prisoners. There was a large slab of stone buried in the ground at the creature's feet. An iron ring depended from this stone, with the creature's chains linked to it. Both the creature's hands and feet were bound and secure, and there were a handful of wardens there to guard it. The Duke was speaking in an alien tongue. The language sounded like various pitches of growls, howls, barks, and whines, with occasional baying. William's men glanced at one another with suspicious ignorance etched on their expressions. So, Duvaughn, William addressed the creature. Explain yourself. The Duvaughn growled. Do not be surprised, said William, continuing to speak in the alien tongue. You are not as mythical as you choose to be. The guards exchanged suspicious glances again, but remained steadfast and silent. The Devon growled fiercely. Why should I speak to you? The Devon demanded. I can smell the blood of my pack brother on you. It is possible, William returned. I have killed Devons before. One of them could have been your pack brother, unfortunately. I can't be certain, as you all look alike to me. Just as all plants look alike, barked the Devon. Don't they? Laughed William. Fool of an Andal, the Devon snapped. True. I didn't choose my words wisely, William deigned. But what I meant was that I don't often take the time to stop and find out who I'm killing in the press of battle. William motioned to one of the guards. The guard stood up straight and saluted him. William spoke to him in the common tongue of Andal. Make sure our guest is secure at all times. Don't end up like Bob. The guard nodded and saluted Edward. You are a dead Andal, the creature growled in common. William smiled and bowed, and they left the tent. There's always a Bob. The green hills came alive with the thunder of hoofbeats. An army of 2,000 men roared over their peaks and continued, charging into battle. This army bore the standard of a bear roaming through the forest. They were the Knights of Corinth, led by Chief General Xylo Zacine, and they served King Hayden de Corinth. The enemy coming upon them fast wore the standard of a winged serpent. They were the Knights of Emeretti, led by General Calab, and they served Duke Francois de Emeretti. The two armies slammed into each other, swords and spears driving, shields and pieces of armor grinding and clanging. Metal rent metal, or, in some instances, wood and cloth. Horses and men roared their fury. Teeth gnashed and blood stained the ground. Death cries pierced the air. Both armies retreated to their respective side, and the dust began to settle. Hayden scanned the carnage with dismay and shook his head dejectedly. Another relentless draw, he sighed. Another costly fight. Too many lives are being lost. I must find a way to not only defeat my enemies, but to take as little life as possible. My liege, the sentinel Abernathy held him. General Zacine returns with his report. It can wait, breathed Hayden. First, see to the wounded. Then make sure everyone is fed and rested. Then send Zacine to my tent. We will discuss the matter there and then. Of course, my liege, Abernathy bowed. A few hours slowly passed. Then he attended the wounded, and everyone received a meal. After paying each one of his men a visit and giving them some hearty words of encouragement, Hayden took his leave to his tent and sat down to a meal of his own. With Hayden's meal nearly consumed, Abernathy brought word that Xylo wished an audience with him. Hayden canted his head in consent, and Abernathy went to fetch the general. General Zacine arrived within a few moments, and Hayden offered him a seat across his makeshift dining table. Xylo sat down obediently, but did nothing to hide his unrest. My liege, said the general, allow me to speak plainly. Hayden nodded, and Zacine continued. I am ill at ease with the outcome of this latest skirmish with the Emeretti. 400 of my men have been slaughtered, another 800 are wounded, and 80 or so are mortally wounded. I am not pleased with this outcome. Nor am I, Hayden returned. I understand your earnestness, Xylo, and I agree. We must alter our tactics. Too many lives are being lost on both sides. There are far too many wounded, and we have yet to aid Lords Falden, Ugero, and Vallis in the west against Lord de Lagrave's army of death. My liege, if I may, offers Zacine. Lord de Emeretti is known to be an honorable man. Moreover, as it appears neither one of you are winning this war, perhaps it would be better to offer a treaty. Time is of import. The sooner we finish with this conflict, the sooner we can aid Lords Falden, Ugero, and Vallis's armies, the better. And Lord de Emeretti could be a valuable ally against Lord Lagrave's, as he is at odds with him as well. As ever, you are very intuitive, Xylo. Hayden praised the chief general. My armies are spread too thin as it is, and our allies to the west need us now. I cannot determine any other resolution at this time. Send a herald, if de Emeretti will meet with me at the city of Arncross. We will parley and come to a treaty that is beneficial to both our respective countries. Shall be done, my liege. Xylo smiled and saluted him. I hope it is the right thing, Hayden remarked, as the scene fled from the tent. We jumped into another flashback here. But this section is just about done, so we'll finish up real quick. King Hayden awoke with a start. A queer uneasiness sat in the pit of his stomach. He scanned his bedchamber and discovered nothing amiss, shook his head. I hope these last 4 years were not just an interlude in the great wars. Hayden mused grimly, and that they are not about to resume. He reached for the mug of mead at his nightstand and took a pull to steady himself. Then he attempted to return to sleep. William faced his generals in a war council. Now is this the best way to seize Castle de Corneille? Are there any other ideas to consider? There was a general murmur among the generals seated before him. Kalov, the chief general, spoke. No more ideas are among us, my lord. As always, your wisdom proves flawless here. William studied the man for a moment and nodded. We are agreed then, William intoned. His general saluted him obediently, then let it begin. You are dismissed. Thomas watched Deborah's face silently. While she slept, she was already maturing into a beautiful young woman. She would indeed be a most beauteous queen someday. At the same time, she was still a child in many ways. Yet he sensed something strange about her. Feeling his gaze, she awoke and looked up into his eyes. He seemed not to notice her staring directly at him. You are very somber, her voice broke into his thoughts. Is something wrong? No, he said simply, meeting her gaze at last. Then why are you staring at me? I'm thinking about what's to come. What is that? She asked mischievously. Are you planning to have your way with me? How glib, the mage admonished her. If I desired to have you, I would have already done so. Even here, no one could have prevented me. The dark intensity of his voice surprised her, and she looked upon him with fear for the first time. She had not considered, for even the slightest moment, that he would or could do such a thing. Sensing the fear he instilled in her, Thomas laughed and set her back at ease. You know, Thomas sighed, I would think that your mind could come up with something better than that. I'm a wizard, not a scoundrel. The fear she felt subsided slightly, but she knew he had just taught her a valuable lesson without meaning to. I am sorry, Deborah lowered her eyes in embarrassment. I did not mean to sound so accusing. I just wanted to make it a point to tell you to use your mind, Thomas sighed. If you have learned anything else from this experience, I truly hope that you have learned that your mind is a powerful thing, more powerful than you know yet. My mind? She wondered aloud. Yes, your mind. Thomas touched his index finger to her brow. Your mind can be more powerful than even mine, but it lacks training and discipline. Not even my mentor could tell what your full potential may be. But we shall leave this conversation for another day. Our escort approaches. Escort, Deborah queried. End of section. Now, the next section is the fall of Corneille, and I will read that in another video, probably in a couple weeks. That was definitely interesting. I love a lot of his writing style, and in some places, I think he maybe didn't let the reader know that he was going into a flashback. But once I realized that I was in a flashback, it seemed okay. The story flowed. I liked it. And this was his first book, so it's clear that he was searching for his writing style. I've been there. And it looks like he's getting his footing near the end of that. It was really interesting. The flashback was really interesting. And to tie it all in with, I think the king was dreaming there near the end a little bit, right after the flashback that Thomas was having, and then they went right back to Thomas and Deborah. That was kind of cool. So that was interesting and enjoyable to read. I enjoyed it a lot more than I remember the first time I had read through it years ago. I had tried to get into it, but we'll get back into the next section, the fall of Corneille, in a couple of weeks, like I said. I hope you enjoyed this read-through and the little visit by Luna. And with that all being said, Logan out.